I
Good to
love
go.
it. John, it's wonderful to meet you, sir. Thank you for taking a minute out today.
Oh, thanks for taking the time and thanks for inviting me on. I'm looking forward to it.
Yes, sir. Me too. So, before we get into your world of words, I want to begin with 5 years ago. This pandemic was raging. We were all figuring it out, so many unknowns. So, ultimately, how did you survive the pandemic and how has it reverberated into your life and what you do today?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think what it did for me, that it did for a certain number of other people, was allowed me to focus on priorities and concentrate on the things that really mattered to me. There are so many things that can be a distraction or a noise or an obligation that are not really at the core of who you are or what you want to do. So, I mean, I really enjoy reading. It's a solitary function. I really enjoy writing. It's a solitary function. So, in some ways, the pandemic at the beginning was a thing that allowed me to do some of those solitary functions, but it also reminded me of the importance of connection with people either in person later on in the pandemic or at the beginning, just staying connected on Zoom and whether it's family or friends or things like that. So it really allowed me to push away some of the noise and things that had secondary obligations and to concentrate on the things that really mattered most to me, which were, writing, reading, my family, my friends, and some organizations I'm associated with.
I sometimes feel like in the afterglow of living through that, that it's almost like a left behind, kind of like, kind of this biblical sense of who was left behind. And even though and it's not even necessarily physical, I think it's emotional, psychological, because there are some people that just absolutely haven't left that era and they're stuck in it. And there's others that are like, there's an extra sense of vigor. It's the existential waiting for Godot moment where it's like, what are you going to do? You have this opportunity. Mother Nature said, stop. Where are you going to go?
Yeah, I'm very empathetic for the people that it really affected them in a major way, either through a loss or the personal changes to their circumstances.
Yeah.
But I know for me, it's something that I experienced and something I moved out of, and I am changed by it. I would not say I want to go through it again. I would not say it made me a worse person. It maybe made me a more focused person. But I am empathetic for those people that it was a major event in their life because of circumstances or tragedy.
So let me ask you this. If I put you in front of a bunch of 12-year-olds, kids always get the truth out of you. It's career day, and there's a kid in the back
Mm.
of the room that's like, hey, what do you do for a living? How do you answer him?
I tell them I'm into publishing and I'm into books and learning and expressing ideas. So that's very vague. 12-year-olds may give you a little quizzical look. What does that mean? So I'll just be more concrete and say I publish or I help to publish books, and they'll get that as a more concrete thing. I always joked when my parents, who were simple people that I love very dearly, when I worked my way up in publishing over a 30-year period, my mother still thought I was involved with printing in some way because printing and publishing gets confused, or people always assumed I was an editor or writer. And in most of my career, I more got involved with the management or the direction of publishing. And then when I started write books on my own, I started to really be more interested in expressing ideas. So it's interesting what publishing means to people, and I have to think about what it would mean to a 12-year-old. It may
Yeah.
be too abstract a term.
Yeah. So let me ask you this. What did you want to be when you were 12? Was your life always writing and wanting to getting into books, or was it something else?
Yeah, about a year or two before I was 12, my parents took me to house auctions around Princeton, New Jersey. And they sold the really great stuff first, and the stuff that was really of no value or didn't have a lot of bidders came at the very end. And we'd be there at the end buying crazy stuff, and we would get these boxes, 10, 15 boxes of really great books for $1, $2, or $3. And I'd bring them home and I'd go through them in my bedroom, and they just seemed like there was a world opening up to me of those type things. So I didn't know what I wanted to be, but I was surrounded by books of every subject, of every kind. And, although there was not enough hours in the day to read one or two of them, I wanted to read and absorb every one of them. So, the trite answer was at some point maybe I wanted to be a geologist or an astronaut, but really what I now understood, I was really interested in the written word, books, learning, and education. So that's probably the more true answer than saying astronaut.
Was there a seminal book for you? Was there one that was very foundational that you still think back as one of the first early books that really made a deep impression on you?
Probably not at 12 because you're still reading those books that you're required to in middle school and things like that. But as I moved into high school, I understood high literature a little bit more. I mean, we're all exposed to Catcher in the Rye and A Separate Peace and To Kill a Mockingbird, which are really, really great books. But then when I moved into college and I went to school for education and for library science, I started to be exposed to some really esoteric interesting people and interesting ideas and found out there's a whole bunch of other people out there that are interested in esoteric and interesting ideas as well. So you start to find your tribe. So, I would say when I was really young, the Guinness Book of World Record first came out, and I remember buying or having my parents buy, a paperback copy of it, and just going through this really weird book of strange photos and strange
Yeah.
records and things like that. And I almost looked at it and I looked at it and I thought, how did this come about? What is behind this? Because prior to seeing something like that, you're used to, picture books as a child or novels or something like that. Where did this thing come along? So I think there's a bit of a seed that's planted in my mind, maybe even before I was 12, as to looking at this book and thinking, man, whatever this is weird. I love that. And one other thing I'll add is, not very intellectual, but maybe Mad Magazine at that time.
Yeah.
Everybody from that era will remember this thing as something that really caught a cultural moment by lampooning so many things. So those weird type things probably caught early John's attention.
That's interesting because I was the same way. I remember getting the Guinness book and seeing like the picture of the dude with nine tennis balls in his mouth. And I'm like, I don't even think I could do two. How is this guy? And then just strange
Yeah.
feats of strength and whatnot. And it's like human beings really stretch to like fill time. It's like we are constantly entertaining ourselves. And that book is indicative of that.
By the way, you're probably a better person for not being able to put two tennis balls in your
Yeah,
mouth as well.
I
So.
totally get that now. I hadn't thought about that. So what was the first thing that you wrote that you got a response from somebody and felt like I can string words together. I can make a story. This is something that is a part of me.
I would think everybody in your audience has a teacher that said nice things about them in some sense, in some subject area. And that positive affirmation from somebody other than your family was really went a long way. And maybe it was a PE teacher saying about how good you were at basketball, or an English teacher saying about your essays, or somebody that said you're really good at math. And that's really the gift of teachers, that you don't even know the effect you're having on some kids, and you may never know unless you run across them someday, years to come. But I can think of a couple English teachers and social studies teachers that said complimentary things about, your 16-year-old juvenile effort to try to express yourself. But I think it probably when I moved into business and publishing, and I would start to write a report or start to write some sort of communication, and you could tell that it meant something to somebody, and there was a real connection that you would make that you were making. The first book I wrote was on how to write a book. Second book, what I wrote was on how to tell family stories, which was about the importance of telling your family stories. Everybody has a genealogy, but what are the stories about how your parents met, or how you became engaged to your spouse, or what was the your favorite toy as a child? When I started to explain that book to people, I really see a light come on in people's eyes, because everybody has those tried and true stories they've heard and they like to tell, and they really get a great response. So those that spark you saw in people's eyes when you start to express yourself and you really see that it means something to them. That's probably the first time that I really felt that way.
So if you could go back in time or even today and hang out with one writer, be a fly on
Mm.
the wall and see how they did what they did, Who would
Hmm.
that writer be?
Whenever I play the parlor game of who currently would you like to meet, I think most of the people that you would come across probably are so accustomed to having somebody say, "Hey, Bruce Springsteen, I love your music. You're really talented, blah, blah, blah." And there's probably not much of a genuine conversation that takes place because they've been put on such a pedestal. And then when I think about the writers that I find really interesting, I think what I find interesting is their writing. I don't know that they'd be that interesting to
Yeah,
sit down to, or they may be disappointing, or even to sit and watch them write. I don't know about that. I mean, there are some people, everybody, you've heard about the life of Ernest Hemingway.
yeah,
And yet, what an interesting person he was, and what a colorful life he lived. Meanwhile, in today's society, he probably would not be the person he is today because it's a whole different world that he lived in and he grew up in the 20s and 30s. So I think about people like that. I think I'm going to leave all my writers where they are in the
yeah.
past and not have to sully their memory of mine of them because they'd probably either disappoint or be different than what I've made up about them.
There was one place I remember when I went to Europe the first time. I was in Rome and I was going through a guided tour, and there was a tea shop where all the writers would hang out. And I kept
Mm,
thinking how dreamy that would have been to just walk in there. Because you're not really hanging out with them. You're going in and you're going to
sure,
be by proxy hearing things, or
sure.
maybe running into the Beats in a diner early in
Yeah,
the morning in New
yeah.
York and finding Ginsberg and Kerouac and all of those guys just hanging out. That would be fun.
Yeah, that would be a great reference. And then like the Algonquin Round Table, a famous one as well. So I do think if you or I walked in our period dress and the Algonquin Round Table was meeting or the Beats were meeting in a coffee shop, they'd probably look askance at us and look, who
Yeah.
is this guy?
Yeah.
And you're not a member of the group. And what are you doing here? And
Yep.
you're going to have to prove yourself. So once again, I think it'd be neat to, as you said, eavesdrop or look over their shoulder,
Yeah.
but I don't think there'd be much breaking into any of those groups, including the one in Italy.
Yeah, totally. So let me ask you this. Of all of the people that have been in your life, who has been the inspiration? Who's been kind of a heroic force for you to evolve into who you are today?
It's tough. I would go back and forth between either my wife or my mother or father. I'm going to say my father. My father grew up in pretty humble circumstances, lost his parents during the Depression, worked on the freight train on a railroad for 44 years, fought in World War II, got a Dear John letter from his first wife while he was in World War II. And he really kept a smile on his face and kept a positive attitude through what most people would say was a pretty challenging life between the Depression, World War II, Dear John letter, and working in a pretty challenging environment on a freight train in a caboose, very hot, very cold, very wet for all those years. So I'd probably say retrospectively, my dad. I don't know that I probably expressed that at the time, though.
So I got two distinct questions about kind of how your life is wrapped around the words. One is a writer, one is a publisher. And the first one is, as a publisher, are we in unprecedented times of having huge volumes of works getting published because the way the industry is now with self-publishing and different levels of financing? Are we seeing just an absolute flood of material in a way that we didn't see maybe 10, 15, 20 years ago?
Yes and no. So at the end of the day, if there are 10,000 books published a year, you're only going to hear about 50 of them.
Yeah,
And if there's 250,000 books published a year, you're only going to hear about 50 of them again as well.
gotcha.
So with some of the self-published books, the people that really want to feel that accomplishment of publishing, but feel it's impossible to find a publisher or an agent, they'll take the self-publishing route, but they'll never promote the book, and the book will never have an audience. And it's almost like if the tree falls in the forest, does anyone hear it? If you publish a book and nobody's ever bought it, is it really even a book? So
Yeah,
while what you're saying, there's a lot more out there, a lot of them are really just done almost as a vanity project that may serve its purpose of giving you a book that gives you satisfaction. But if you're trying to seek a larger audience, it's not really making a dent. You're still only hearing about those 50 or 100 books. in any given year, and they're the ones that have an effect on you or on the general public.
I think about that. What was that? 100 Shades of Grey or whatever. What was the name?
50 Shades of Grey.
50 Shades of Grey. And I remember reading the story about how that became kind of a phenomenon, and that started
Right,
online. The author
right.
had submitted some lines, and it kind of grew
Sure,
from there. And I don't know if
sure.
that was self-published in the beginning, but that example to me almost seems like this modern era of social media and internet virality that can happen seems to be like there can be one in a billion that will actually get promoted and become something big.
Yeah, there are some great, great stories of self-published books being sold out of the trunk of a car, people going town to town doing things like that, or starting online and finding their audience. The Martian was that way. So there are some great books that are like that. What I worry is it's a bit like when they have the lottery winner with the big check on the TV
Yeah.
and say, "Listen, I paid $1 and I won $20 million." What they never have on the TV are all the people that paid $1 or worse, $100 and never won anything. So those stories are very inspirational. They're used by the self-publishing companies and self-publishing services, many of which are fine companies and fine services, to really promote that dream. But the most important thing when you're going to make that determination to self-publish is how you're going to reach your audience. And people would like to think it's word of mouth, and people would like to think that there's going to be that snowball effect. But it's a lot of elbow grease and a lot of getting out there, creating something called an author promotional platform.
So, there's that idea of Malcolm Gladwell, 10,000 hours, you become a master of
Yes.
something.
Right, right.
I'm curious in the realm of writing, what is one of the best things that you were told or taught that has helped you develop and mature as a writer?
First, I think Malcolm Gladwell has discounted his 10,000 hour thing. I think there's a whole piece he did. You may want to go back and look at that, but it still, I think, holds a lot of water there. So I think there's still a lot of truth to it. I think when people write their first novel or write a novel and they expect that to be published and popular, it's a bit like saying, I took up tennis this year and I think I might win Wimbledon as well. So really what writing is all about is practice. There's an adage people don't like to hear, but I say it anyway. If you're going to be a novel writer, go write 3 complete novels, bring them to fruition, show them to people, final edits, and then put them in a drawer and now start to write your real book as your fourth book. That's a lot of effort, but really what it belies is the importance of practice and understanding that this is a craft that you're going to get better at, as evidenced by the 10,000 hour thing. You're really working at something that requires skill and effort. And one of the most important things is connecting with other writers and not being afraid to share your work and to experience that feedback or criticism. Many times writers will be the shy creative genius, and I don't want to show it to anybody until it's completely finished. You should be in a writer's group, hopefully in person, and sharing all throughout the entire process.
So, what motivates you to get up every day to do this work? You've been doing it for a while. How do you balance taking care of work in the best way possible and taking care of your own soul? What is that motivation every day?
I think balance is the key word. Some days you have to say, this is going to be an all X day, or this is going to be an all Y day, or I'm going to split things. Some days you know that you're not mentally prepared for heavy lifting. So you have to understand and forgive yourself when your schedule is not what you'd hoped. It's important with writing and publishing to have a schedule and to have a plan, but to also have a little give a forgiveness and a give inside the schedule. If you say every day I'm going to get up at 5 a.m. and write for an hour, you're really going to set yourself up for disappointment. Maybe you have that kind of intestinal fortitude, but really you have to say, listen, I'm going to 5 days a week, some 5 days, get up and write for 45 minutes. And if I miss one of those days, I'm going to try to write for an hour and a half. You have to be willing to say, listen, life intervenes. Sometimes I'm not perfect. Sometimes I'm tired or my knee hurts or whatever the thing might have to do. So you have to be willing to adjust to that schedule and to be flexible.
So let me ask you this. If you were to walk into a room of everybody that knows you in a professional business sense, you swim through that group of people and go up to a podium and you can tell them one fun thing about you. Maybe the first concert, jumping out of a plane, wrestling a crocodile, favorite sporting event that was just over the top energetic. What would be a fun story you could tell that room?
Most of the people in the room are going to think of me as a formal business person, and probably many have seen the fun side of me, not all of them. So in 1981, different era, I hitchhiked from Pennsylvania out to see my sister in Wyoming. And hitchhiking's a very different thing nowadays
Yeah.
and looked at very differently. But at the time, it was more accepted, maybe not as much as the in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. But I never had a negative experience. I always got rides. People were very gracious, extended themselves, money, their homes, place to sleep. So that would be that's my thing that I pull out of my hat that surprises people about me. Because you look at me right now, you don't see hitchhiker on here.
That had to be incredible to see the country that way.
It was.
I mean, that had to like age you almost like a president to see all of those different levels because you got to figure, the thing about the United States is that even though we're so large, there's so many distinctive levels of culture and living and the way people do things that's just vastly different from one area to another. And to see that in one long timeline had to have been crazy.
Yeah, and that's the beauty of the United States, I think. I mean, I just came back from Europe, and you were mentioning before we got online about being having been to Europe. You think, we think of Italy, Germany, Switzerland, Spain, Portugal, all as different places. You could fit them in a portion of the United
Yeah.
States, and yet they're given whole completely different languages, cultures.
Yep.
And even within those countries, you think within Spain, you have the Basque region, Catalonia. So, I mean, that's real. You've hit the nail on the head. We're a bunch of different places, but when we're at our best is when we see ourselves as one and pull together. So,
Yeah. So let me ask you this: of everything that you've done and evolved into at this point, what are you the proudest of?
you know, it would, I have three grown children that I'm very proud of. It would be easy to say that, but that's not what the podcast is about. I'm thankful I have a successful marriage that I think my wife loves me very much. But I guess what I'd have to say is, as I've gotten older, I've seen a lot of people that have become more stayed or more content in what they are and where they are, and their field of vision has narrowed. I think I've always been a curious person that is very eclectic in what I'm curious about. And I think that's even grown in my older age here, that I really am interested in a diverse a group of things. And when I hear about something new or a new writer, I'm like, how have I not known about that?
Yeah.
And I want to take a deep dive into whatever that is. So my children, my marriage, but I'd have to say my curiosity is the thing that probably most fits what you're asking.
So let's move the baton little bit further down the line with this next question. Everyone has a perception of you. Family, friends, everyone that you work with that knows you in the publishing realm as a writer, but you run the show. What's your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
My wife and my sister like to say I'm pretty hard on myself, so I'm as with many people, my harshest critic. I could be a serious person. I should probably take things a little lighter than I do right now. And there's a lot of things that are going on in the world that cause anxiety. So I'm afraid that if I start to sketch what I truly thought about myself, may come off a little negative, but I'm gonna say I'm a curious person that likes to engage and talk to people such as yourself.
So let me ask you this. We get off the call, you can go into a time machine and you can see any sports event, one game. Where are you going to go?
Hmm. My dad was an anti-Yankees fan
Yeah.
and a big Brooklyn Dodgers fan. And before he moved out of New York in 1959, he was able to be at the 1955 World Series when the Dodgers won the World Series. And so he was at that final game. I don't know. I think maybe it was game six. Maybe it'd be kind of cool to be at that game and to be there with my dad.
That was when Campanella ran out and they had the big hug, and I think I remember that
I,
iconic
I
image.
think that's exactly right. That's exactly right. Good memory.
My dad was from Brooklyn. He was born there, and he
Oh,
taught.
nice.
It's almost like a war story. He didn't tell me this until way later in life. We would have these Sunday afternoon armchair kind of things and get into
Love it.
things. It was wonderful, and I remember he told me when they all absorbed the fact the Brooklynites knew that they were leaving, they would drag like these like rag dolls and have, I think it was Charlie. I can't remember the name of the owner that took him to LA, but it had his name on it, and it was really dark. They were really, it was, there was a depression that went into that
Yeah.
area that was very, and I just like seeing the images of Ebbets Field getting torn down. What an
Yeah.
iconic
Yeah.
shrine, you
Yeah.
know. So, but the Phillies and the Royals have had their heyday. 1980, that was a big moment.
Absolutely.
There's so many things that went into that. But so if anybody wants to delve into your world from publishing to writing, anything in between, they have questions, how do they reach out? How do they do that?
I'm big on LinkedIn. You can connect with me there. I love to connect with people there. My publishing consultancy is at Riverwinds with an S consulting.com, riverwindsconsulting.com. And for my books, you can go to booksbyjohnbond.com. And be pleased to connect with anybody and talk to anybody about publishing and writing.
Okay, I love it. Thank you. This has been great, John. I appreciate your story, appreciate your time. Best of luck with everything.
Oh, thanks so much. This was a great conversation. I really appreciate getting to know you and being on your podcast.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Hello, friends. Joe Dimino here. I just wanted to let you know that after 30 years or so, I have finally released my first book of poetry through the mighty Spartan Press here in Kansas City, Missouri. As the creator and host of both Neon Jazz Radio and the Famous Interviews with Joe Dimino podcast, along with being a visual artist, I'm ready to embark on a new adventure and want you to be a part of it. You can get a copy online via Barnes & Noble, Amazon, and actually on the streets in Kansas City at the great Prospero's bookstore off 39th Street. You can also visit joedimino.com for links to the book, to more poetry, and everything in my world, including paintings. Thanks for all of the love and support over the years, and please dig the words.